Well, hello again, and welcome to another one of my UFORUSS podcasts. Now then, over the past few months, we cannot be escaping the fact that the Calvine UFO incident has been sort of top of the tree with ufologists and researchers alike, and many an idea has been bandied about from different sectors of the subject. But of course, it's the work of Dr. David Clarke and his disclosure team based at Sheffield and Hallam University up here in Yorkshire. Their work's been tireless. It's not been 10 minutes. It's not been a quick look around the internet. This has been 10, 15 years of real dogged legwork, if you like, looking through the archives down at Kew, looking at what documentation's available, rigorous searches trying to find out people involved. The fortunate arrival of Craig Lindsay, who was the press officer at Petrevie Castle, which was the nearest airbase at the time, where it is alleged that the newspaper, the Scottish Daily Record, actually contacted, well, it's not alleged, we know, they actually contacted RAF Petrevie Castle to get a quote on the photograph, and of course it was Craig Lindsay at the time who was the desk officer who dealt with all this, and the rest of it we know where the photographs were sent to the MOD and miraculously went missing. But that was a great link in this actual research, and a big pat on the back for David Clarke and the disclosure team, because without Craig Lindsay then we were going nowhere, because of course we got an original first generation print of the actual object that's been the talk of much speculation since 1990. Even, Nick Pope comes under a lot of bashing lately, but Nick Pope has spoke about the Calvine incident from his first days into the UFO spotlight, if you like, from beginning to start talking about the subject to writing his first book, Open Skies, Closed Minds. The Calvine incident has been top of the list for him, along with the Cosford incident, and that's something we hopefully we'll talk about on another day. But what I'm trying to get to here is that I've had a little bit of stick, not a lot. I'm not proclaiming that this is a hoax. I'm not proclaiming that this is the real McCoy. I'm not proclaiming that this is a secret military exercise or that it's an alien spaceship. I'm one of the sort of researchers who looks at the possibilities and look at everything that surrounds a case, what it might be, what it could be. And when you've ironed out everything and got an answer to everything that you're looking at, if you're left with the we don't know, that's as close as you're going to get to, in this day and age, just to getting proof positive that these things exist. And the Calvine incident exists somewhere along the line. Something was photographed. It was sent to the newspapers, it was sent to the MOD, and we've got the photograph. So whichever way you look at it, the thing is real. Now, many people have done this research, but I put a little piece out on my website, which we'll talk about later on, and put it in an article for this month's OLM magazine, which should be landing in your inboxes now if it hasn't already. And I was quite intrigued when I saw this particular photograph on the internet of this beautiful Scottish Highland scene, showing a loch. It was sunlit. It was that orangey time of the afternoon when the photograph was taken. And lo and behold, this photograph was actually from a calendar. Not quite sure when the calendar was produced, but all in all, this was one of the views of the island, if you like. And within the picture of the loch, this is Loch Erocti, I think that's how you pronounce it, which, once I started reading up a little bit more on this particular loch, became intrigued to find that, hang on a minute, Loch Erocti is 21 miles away from Pitlochry. Now, we know how the story goes with the alleged photographer and his colleague were out for a hike. Some people suggest they were out poaching. That's fine. When we think of poaching, straight away you start thinking, well, what were they poaching? Deer? sheep, salmon. If they're hiking out for a few miles, it's a 20-minute, 30-minute drive from where they are, and then they're going to hike with all this gear to go poaching. You're not going to be carrying a deer or something like that all that distance without having probably an all-terrain vehicle to bring your quarry back. So looking at Loch Erocty in the background, it's a fishing loch. Now, it doesn't have salmon in the waters, but it's prevalent for having perch and pike. Now, pike's game fishing, but the thing about the loch is that you need to be licensed to actually fish there, so it's private waters. So could this have been my mind thinking, when we talk about poaching, was it actually just a bit of illegal fishing? And if you were going out for a few hours and wanting a bit of fun, you get a pike on your line, and it's like, the Pacific Ocean people, when they're filming for marlin, pikes are a very, very strong fish, and they give you a real good fight for your money. And could it have been the fact that they've gone out just to do a bit of naughty fishing, if you like? Well, that's one scenario. And then there's this little island in the middle of the loch. It's at the eastern side of the loch. And it's intriguing because it stands out there. When the water's calm, this thing's a diamond shape. The top peak, symmetrical peak, sticks out of the water, and you get a reflection underneath it, and it gives you the bottom peak of a triangle slightly less than the top. And it's starting to look just like the Calvine object. So I thought, this is too good to be true. Let me have a look. So with a little bit of Photoshop work, cut out the island and cut out the object from the images that we've got, and lo and behold, the two fit pretty neatly on top of each other. In fact, very neatly on top of each other, because there's an abnormality within the image where one side is slightly longer than the other, so it's not quite symmetrical. Believe you me, the little island there in Loch Erocty has got this same feature when you invert it. It's slightly elongated to the left-hand side, and when you overlay the two images together, they sit perfectly on top of each other. Now, what about the aircraft? Well, I'm going to go down the road and probably get rotten tomatoes thrown at me here and say that people suggested it could have been a man in a boat. Look at it again. Yes, it could have been a man in a boat. And the fact that we're talking about pike fishing, that's the way to go for pike fishing. You get a pike on your line, and you're in a little rowboat or a little dinghy, and the thing's like another engine. It will pull you, and it'll pull you through the water. I remember having an experience many, many years ago in Southern Ireland, where some friends and I from work used to go every now and again for 2 or 3 days fishing. A little place in Cavan, which was right on the border of northern and southern Ireland, where the river flows through there, near Henniskillen, which made big names during the riot days and what have you. It was quite a bad place to be in the 70s. But in the early 80s, it was a lovely place to go. And we had good times there. And we used to go pike fishing in these little, almost virgin lakes. There were just lakes behind trees in fields and what have you. And you could find pike everywhere. And it was a good time, we had good fun. So what I'm saying is that if the guys were out there doing a bit of fishing, taking a few snaps, and again, when you look at the island from the shot that we've got from this calendar, it's a very rocky waterside where this picture was taken. But if you look beyond the island to the other side of the loch, then you can see the tree line and the hills, and it could well be that would be the ideal place to recreate that photograph, because you've got the bushes overhanging, you're at a higher elevation. If the sunlight's right or the sky's right, then you can blank out a lot of detail unintentionally of the actual water, and the island pops out at you. And again, if there was somebody out there fishing in a boat, if you're half a mile away, with a small camera, who knows if it had a big zoom lens or anything like that? It doesn't appear to have. The thing about the photograph And my good friend Philip Mantle picked up on this as well, and Chris Evers picks up on this. The thing about this photograph is it's perfectly framed. If you were commissioned to take a photograph of this particular object, that is how you would frame the object. Front and central for the main object, a little bit of fill-in around you to give a sense of size and actual physical presence of the object. It looks like it's been done by a professional photographer. Now, the thing again is, we're told there's 6 images. We've got people gone on record who say they've seen the 6 images, people in high places. We've got people from the newspaper say they've seen 6 images, and we've got people from the MOD who say they've seen 6 images. We haven't. We've only got the one to work with. Now, if that was the best photograph of the 6 that they sent to Craig Lindsay at the time from the newspaper, then I'd love to know what's on the others. Because if it's a hoax, the hoax is probably given away within the roll of film. We were told we couldn't have the roll of film because the reason for releasing it, it showed evidence of poaching. Well, was this just a couple of big fish on the side of the riverbank? Who knows? The case goes on. The latest that I pick up on at the moment is that we know Kevin Russell's the name of the photographer. We know Kevin Russell was there in 1990. We've got a photograph of Kevin Russell taken from the time. What I'm led to understand right now is the fact that David Clark and the Disclosure team have actually got a name for the second witness. So that's something else that I'm sure they'll be working on to try and locate and see if they have any more joy with this chap and find out, where's Kevin Russell? Is he still with us? He relatively speaking, he's a youngish man. He'll be in his 50s, but things happen, of course. And, people move on. People pass away. We don't know. But with having 2 names now, there's a possibility that we can actually pinpoint one of them down and then start to get some more detail on this fantastic story that's been going now for the last 12 months and 32 years. I'm looking forward to that. Right then, so the tag name I use, of course, UFORUSS. You know me, I'm Russell Callahan. I used to edit UFO magazine and then went on to produce UFO Data after the sad loss of my then father-in-law, Graham Birdsall. I've been interested in this subject for a long, long time. And I've got a website, and I'm sure one or two of you might have had a look on board and see what's going on there. But there's one thing I would like to share, or a couple of things I'd like to share with you about the website. Now, if you're new to this subject and wondering what the hell us old guys keep talking about, the thing is, this day and age, the stuff that we talk about, the cases from maybe 20, 25 years ago, are still the very best of cases that exist. Calvine, it's 33 years ago since this happened. But in ufological terms, it's one of the latest sightings. Rendlesham Forest is 43 years ago. It's coming up to 50 years. I remember going back 20 years ago when we thought that, the Roswell incident in 1997, coming up when it came up to its 50th anniversary, it seemed like an age ago. It was absolutely ancient and way back in the eons of history. But now the modern cases that we talk about are fast becoming that, historical casebook that's half a century old. And we don't want to let these things die out. But, during that time, there were things happening. And lots of cases, lots of reports. There's always been lots of reports. Lots of hocus pocus, whatever you want to call it, rubbish out there. But quite a few of the cases, and you'll see, were genuine UFO cases. The talk about the fact we had the X-Files in the 90s and the noughties, and that really kicked things on, and that got people, really interested in the subject. Close Encounters in the 70s did exactly the same, that it drove people to invent these things just to get a little bit of publicity. But when we talk about publicity, there's 2 things to remember here. Publicity in the UK is one thing. Publicity in the United States is another. Now, forgive me, but this sounds a little bit harsh. If you go back to the 40s and 50s, if you had a story that was exciting, that was different, that was alien, if you like, there were 1,000 newspapers in the United States of America printing locally, state by state. There were dailies, they had a morning, an afternoon, and an evening paper. This was the Facebook, this was the internet of the day. The newspapers needed stories to fill their pages. And guess what? If you had a story to tell, there's a few dollars in it for you. I'm not saying it's going to make you a millionaire, it's not. But the newspapers needed to fill their pages, and they would pay for stories. Cross the Atlantic to the UK, and there's none of that unless it involves party political people or famous people or something like that caught with a donkey or a sheep. That doesn't matter. That's the same all over the world. But instinctively, this country didn't really pay for UFO stories. These were just page fillers. But again, back in the day in America, people got paid for their stories. And where are the bulk of the stories? Where, that old saying, it only ever happens to rednecks or farmers with one front tooth and one bracer over the shoulders. It's that sort of problem. It was, America has always been more the commercial place rather than the British being more the conservative country. That said, with the birth of camcorders in the 80s and 90s, then people started seeing UFOs recording these things, and TV programs were starting to pick up on it. Now then, one of the things that I noticed in my time at UFO magazine, when we used to get a video sent in, I've got this video of a UFO, can I say, yes, please send it, let's have a look at it. And it'd be lights in the sky, it'd be something a little bit out of focus, it would be nighttime stuff. And be honest with you, the cameras at the time, the home camcorders, were like a box brownie. In bright sunlight, they were fantastic, get you a really good image, but the minute that the lights started to drop, then you got no resolution, lots of grain on the photographs. And one of the things that stood out with the early UFO film clips that we used to be sent was, one main thing, I've only just got the camcorder. And that was, everybody who was sending these things in, the first thing the filmer thinks a UFO. And it turns out the fact that it's actually the camcorder, it's the lack of experience, it's not knowing how the camcorder really works and trusting everything to automatic settings, which as a photographer is the worst thing you can do. You can't compose a picture. You need to be able to be in control of your iris, your focus, your f-stops, etc., etc. But again, when it comes to dark nights and bright lights in the sky, it's almost impossible to get an automatic camera to take an image that's realistic to what you're actually looking at. It will out of focus the bright spots, and you end up with these orby type effects, or again the diamond shape that came out that looks intrinsically like the Calvine object, isn't it? But it's not. Panasonic were one of the best makers of camcorders at the time, and their electronic iris within the camera was that diamond shape. And because you've got certain elements within the lens, sometimes when the light hit it wrong, then all you saw was this diamond shape. And that's been used in many, many UFO documentaries as one of the better UFO shots, if you like. So the diamond shape was actually just an artifact of the camera. Remember the old Batwing UFOs we used to see? Once again, that was a different shape iris within the workings of the camcorder, that when it was hit by a bright light, it used to reflect back into the lens, and it would show this out of focus image of the actual iris aperture, and it gave the Batwing shape, and that's where we were, and that confused people for a long, long time, until the occasional news cameraman, or shall we say professional videographer, actually caught something on camera, and again, one or two very, very good examples of UFOs that are hard to explain. And we have to go right back to the total solar eclipse in Mexico back in the early 90s that brought Jaime Maussan into prevalence, really, with 4 or 5 different cameras filming the same object during the eclipse, which, for one better explanation, showed the typical silver shining, spinning UFO from 5 different angles. And that's still got to be debunked, if you like. There's 1 or 2 people come and say, oh, it's a model, it's a miniature. No, it's not. It could be a very bright star in the nights, in the blacked out sky from the solar eclipse, but there actually seems to be movement on there, and there actually seems to be some vapor coming off the thing as well. As the camera focuses on it, you can actually see the heat haze around the thing. So very good positive UFO clips there from Mexico. There's been a lot of rubbish from Mexico, let's be honest, but those early clips from the solar eclipse, very hard to discount. Now, I mentioned my website, UFORUSS.co.uk. Building it up slowly but surely, but there's quite a few sections on there now. The podcasts from all the Paranormal Panorama presenters are there as well. There's a photo archive. There's articles from things I've put into magazines and things I've written just for the website as well. You might find some of those interesting. But there's a video archive up there as well. Now, you can imagine over the years spent at UFO Magazine, we got lots and lots of videos, many hours of footage that we trawled through looking for the best of the UFO clips that we could find. We put quite a few of those together over the years. If you go to my YouTube channel, so if you go to YouTube and just look at UFORUSS and go to the UFORUSS playlist, there's quite a lot more UFO bits and pieces on there, and some ramblings from me from trips abroad and what have you, getting stuck in Mexico, waiting for somebody to come and find me and things like that. But there are some good UFO little mini documentaries that we did. And one of them, funnily enough, I just shared with Chris Evers today, actually, which was one we did to promote the magazine back in the late 90s. W.H. Smith, who was the main seller of the magazine, said, why don't you put a cover DVD on it and let's see what that does? So in conjunction with W.H. Smith, we produced The Mysterious Fears, which is a 25-minute long little documentary featuring some of the better clips from camcorders around the world and some historical clips as well. And it's narrated by my dear old father-in-law Graham Birdsall, who does a wonderful job on the narration. There's some historical cases and bringing it right up to date at the time into sort of 1998, 1999 was when the thing was published. So have a look at that. That's on there. But there's something on my website that I'm quite proud of. It's something that we did in 2000. We started filming it in 2001, should I say. And sadly, before the thing was actually completed, that's when we lost Graham the year after. So it's quite emotional towards the back end of the thing. But this was a gentleman contacted us back in 2000, and it's a man called Anthony Woods. Now, Anthony was just an unassuming young family man, lived down in Waterlooville or in Havant, down just shy of Portsmouth on the south coast. And over a period of 3 or 4 years, he'd been going out with his camcorder and with his brother-in-law, and he captured some of the most remarkable daylight UFO footage you've ever seen. Now, the skeptics at the time came out with, oh, this is just balloons or just debris blowing on the wind. Yeah, 1 or 2 shots might be balloons, but there's hours and hours and hours of this stuff. Predominantly filmed in daylight, which makes the big difference to me that, it's all right filming lights in the night sky. It can be anything from an airplane, star, helicopter, whatever. But this stuff's daylight film predominantly. And there's some fantastic sequences on there. So it's worth a look. The documentary talks to Anthony, who reveals quite a lot of experiences during his youth. As a child, 7 or 8 years old, started having events in his life which one would say were either paranormal or ufological. And then as he grew to his adulthood and became a family man, him and his wife started noticing things in the sky. So he invested in a camcorder, and the story starts from there, really. There's lots and lots of footage. Now, during the time there, Graham and I have been down to film some stuff. Tony Barker, an old colleague of mine from UFO magazine days, we'd gone down a couple of times to get the thing put together. We spent a lot of time with Anthony and getting to know the lad. And he was open and honest, and a beautiful family, a beautiful home, so unassuming and so genuinely honest person that you wouldn't doubt anything that Anthony was telling you. What had happened, what he'd seen, what he had filmed is something that we have to make our own mind upon. But then he told us, he said, sometimes I sort of get this feeling that something's coming, that they're there. It only happens with the UFO stuff. He says, but I get the urge to either get outside into the fields or even into the back garden. And I thought, well, yeah, okay, so is this just coincidence or whatever? And this particular day, while we were down there filming, the four of us, there was Anthony, his brother-in-law, myself, and Tony Barker, were stood in the back garden. We were having a cup of coffee and a cheeky cigarette at the time. And I got the camera there because I was just taking a few, shots to insert into the documentary like any gut filmmaker would, fill in shots. And all of a sudden, Anthony just doing it, here's one, and pointed it way, way up into the sky. And I turned the camera around, and sure enough, now at the time I thought this to be way up there with the air traffic corridors, 25, 30,000 feet. And way, way up in the sky was this single silver orb. As I managed to film it, and I'm following it with the camera, within a matter of seconds, this thing, from being 25, 30,000 feet up in the sky to my reckoning, it might have been less, was over the rooftops. And I actually managed to recapture it on the camera and show it going over the rooftops and just then going out of sight. Now, Anthony knew this was coming. He got the inclination. He said, I just turned around and there it was. And as I say, managed to capture that on film, which is quite unique in itself. You're out there making a documentary about a UFO experiencer, and all of a sudden you get involved in the subject with him. And it's very much like, the Stephen Greers of this world. Think of him what you will. Commanded UFOs, he can bring them and what have you. Who knows what it is? But Anthony's sightings, Anthony's sightings were some of the most genuine things that I've ever seen. And the sequence of footage that's in there, there's 25 minutes of just UFO clips taken by this man, and narrated over, and there's some nice background music that was actually played by Tony Barker at the time on a Spanish guitar, which sounds really, really good. That's by the by. As the story developed, and as we're looking through some of these clips from Anthony, one of them jumped out at the time and has come back to me now, and we're going to say that C word again, the Calvine incident, where we've talked about this possibly being a tethered target for radar testing, for stealth technology testing, for whatever reason. Could this thing be an inflatable that was tethered to the ground, that you couldn't see the wagon or equipment it was tethered to because of the location you were on a hillside? It's easy to drop things down below the sight line. And we suggested that perhaps the tether broke, and this is why the Calvine UFO seemed to hover silently for some 10 minutes and then shoot off up into the sky silently again. Or could it have been the fact that the release of it was part of the experiment, that we're suggesting that there's a RAF aircraft there, a Harrier or a Hawk, whatever it is. It's been suggested it came from Wharton Aerospace RAF base as such. Who knows? But could it have been the fact that it was released on purpose to test out the radar capabilities of the aircraft that had been monitoring it in the first place? And if it was released at the right time with the winds in the right place, then would it just go up to 25, 30, 40,000 feet before blowing itself out over the ocean and destroying itself, never to be found? Well, there's a sequence on the Anthony Woods footage that was filmed at Portsdown Hill. Now, Portsdown Hill overlooks Portsmouth Harbour. Portsmouth Harbour is the home of the British Royal Navy. And back in 2000, when we filmed this, there was a much more prevalent Royal Navy presence there now, obviously with cutbacks and things like that. Things aren't as prevalent as they used to be, but it's a very busy military area. Now, Portsdown Hill also is home to a big radar station. And as we stood, Anthony stood at this on a lay-by on the main road going down towards Portsdown Hill. And you can hear a generator in the background, and he's literally pulled into a lay-by, and there's a little coffee shop caravan there, and that's what the noise is of the generator you can hear in the background. But he filmed this thing for some 12, 13 minutes, I think it was, without it moving. It just stayed there in the sky. Now, it's at some distance away, but we're getting as close as we can with the cameras and a little bit of magnification in the editing in the studio when we put the film together. But this thing is a weird shape. It's also grey, and it's different shades of grey. And it looks like it could be angular or it could be rounded on edges. It's a very strange shape, but it just stays there. Now then, is that something of a similar type of experiment that was used to check the radar, to actually make the settings right, to make it just right, to test things out? I don't know. It's interesting, is this one? And it's there, as I say, it's there, 11, 12, 13 minutes it's filmed. It never moves, just stays there in the sky. This is in broad daylight. This isn't a star or something, or a helicopter hovering in the sky. It wouldn't hover in the same place for that length of time anyway. But have a look at it. I find this one extremely intriguing, along with a couple of other bits that we see. There's a famous clip my good colleague Chris Evers from OLM magazine got hold of at Hull Fair going back some years. And there's a clip on Anthony's footage that is pretty much identical to what was seen at the Hull Fair one, where this thing almost looks organic, flying across the sky at great speed. It's also the Tumbler. This one, it looks like something out of Star Wars. It's a black, bluey coloured object, but it's filmed in daylight. Again, this is broad daylight. These aren't lights in the sky. These are physical objects. Now, have a look at the video. You can go to my website and go to the video archives, and if you click on it, you can actually download it from my Dropbox account, so you've got the pristine copy. It's an absolute direct copy from the DVD that we produced, so you know the quality's pretty good. Think on it, it's 23 years ago since we did it, so TV capabilities have moved on. That's available to us as semi-professional people, if you like, to work with lower budgets. But it's still, it's good quality. It's well put together. It's a fascinating story, and that's that of Anthony Woods. Another one of the film clips that's there on my website, it's titled Student Project. And this was done by a team from Horsforth Media College in Leeds. And it's well put together. It's a nice little 5-6 minute mini documentary about the UFO subject. Now, involved in this is one film. In fact, Gary's involved in the journey, because at the time, Gary Hesseltine was a contributor to the magazine, and he was quite fascinated by the stuff that Anthony Woods was filming, and he features in the documentary. But in this particular mini short, which was done after the journey and after Gary had moved on to do his own things, they talk about this sighting over Skipton in North Yorkshire. And in the comments, it suggested that this can't be an aeroplane. There's no airport within miles and miles and miles of where this thing was, because the object was filmed by a police officer, and it was filmed, I believe, from the police car camera. And you see this bright light in the sky. It's just becoming dusk. It's an evening sky, and the bright light is tracked by the camera, and it seems to follow a path. Now, if you listen carefully to what's said, again, there's no airport within miles. Well, I believe in accurate reporting, and I believe that things should be told truthfully, and that you shouldn't hide things to get a story out of a story. And there's a map shown on this video clip that shows that, the terrain of Skipton, which is gateway to the Yorkshire Dales, if you like. Listen, Skipton is 9 miles away from Leeds and Bradford Airport. Now, 9 miles for an aircraft coming into land is less than 2 minutes. And an aircraft on its final approach coming into Leeds and Bradford actually comes over, when it's doing the west to east approach, it flies straight over Skipton, and it flies straight over that area of the sky where this thing was reportedly filmed. So, what, again, putting a stamp on an ex-police officer reporting a police officer sighting and making this thing sound that it's genuinely, it's impossible for it to be anything mundane, because we've done our research. Well, if you do your research a bit better, you find that a busy Leeds and Bradford Airport, just 9 miles away from where this thing allegedly happened. So that's disappointing for me. And that's a lot of the stuff, Gary Esseltine went his own way from the magazine. He was a good contributor. He started off the Prufos Police Officers Reporting UFOs database, which was a fascinating thing. He got it up to 200 knock cases of serving police officers actually seeing and reporting UFOs. John Hanson took that one further with his Haunted Skies books, and believe you me, the detail that's within John Hanson's work is absolutely exceptional. And I know John struggled a little bit selling the books. He's put his retirement into developing and producing these books, full of wonderful photographs, full of wonderful interviews. And I can highly recommend that if you want to spend your money on something to read and something to hold in your hand, have a look at John Hanson's books, because they are something special. He tells it like it is. Just John, he's a good old-fashioned Midlands. He's got a lovely Brummie accent tucked in the back there. And he does. He gets into the confidence of the witnesses. He doesn't just report on the things. He's interviewed witnesses where witnesses are alive, where he's been able to get the detail. And these are verbatim reports from John. And he keeps in touch with people as well. He'll ring people up and see how they're going on. And it might be 20 years later, and just to see if there's anything else happened. And I love that in the subject. And I think a lot of that's missing these days, where, the personal thing, somebody having a UFO experience, be it good or bad, could have gone through a very emotional part of their life. And it's not just there to glorify the fact that, wow, we've seen a UFO and this UFO was seen there doing this, doing that, doing the other. It's about the story behind the thing, and you can get a lot more out of it when you get talking to the person involved. And that's where, with The Journey and Anthony Woods, when we were first presented with a little short tape that Anthony sent us with a few clips on of his UFO sightings and the stuff that it filmed, immediately you think, wow, we've got something special here. And then when you spend time with the man and his family, you realise that this has actually been a big part of his life, and it's actually moulded his life, if you like. It's touched something in him. It's very personal, very emotional experiences. But yet again, he's still filming this stuff. And we talk about it as towards the back end of the documentary, that although a lot of this stuff you see from 1997, 8, 9, 2000, Anthony was still filming stuff after we'd left and visited him. It went off the radar a little bit, did Anthony, because once we released the documentary, one or two of the hard-nosed skeptics were shouting rubbish balloons, this, that, and the other. A lot of people loved what they saw, and a lot of people firmly believe, like us, that some of this stuff that Anthony filmed is certainly not mundane objects. It's something else. But as I say, the emotional part of it takes a lot of guts to come forward and tell people that you've had these experiences. You know, we hear about pilots, we hear about police officers, we hear about military. I ain't reporting that, they'll think I'm nuts. Hence Alan Gottfried, one of Alan Gottfried's famous quotes. He said, "You think I'm nuts?" to his superiors when he was telling them what he saw. It's harsh, it's cruel when this happens. Things within the UFO community are indeed very, very strange. People are touched by the subject. I'm a firm believer in, if you've seen one, you know you've seen one. If you think you've seen one, you probably haven't. But it's the background that goes on, that these things, some people, these experiences have some terrible, terrible times. Some have some wonderful times. The thing I'm looking forward to later this year, my good colleague Philip Mantle and his Pascagoula encounter with Calvin Parker. This has changed a man's life. It's been there for 50 years. It's the 50th anniversary when the book comes out. And this was a young man at the time, along with his colleague, who believed they were abducted by aliens. And the proof behind it is very, very strong indeed. And as Philip says, this is one of the best research cases, with a paper trail, with interviews, with witnesses that are still alive, that's ever been put down in writing. And with Dr. Irina Scott, they're coming up with, there's been much written about the Pascagoula case, don't get me wrong, but you'll find that the Philip Mantle story accounts and Dr. Irina Scott's accounts are absolutely, full of hard-nosed evidence, stuff that you simply can't ignore. And I think the subtitle, as Philip has revealed recently, is Beyond Reasonable Doubt. And I can't wait for that one to come out, and I hope you all feel the same about that. So it's been a bit of a different podcast this time, a bit of a ramble. As I say, Chris Evers and I are working on something for the future with the documentaries, and we're also we're looking at ways to relaunch the live shows as well, where we can all interact and get people on board with us and have a good couple of hour chat every now and again about this wonderful subject we call ufology. I'm still involved. I'm still excited about it. Hopefully, David Clark and the Disclosure team are moving on again. To say it's 33 years ago since the Calvine incident happened, much has happened in the last 9 months. Give it another 6 months and let's see where we are. Now I believe we've got the name of the second witness at the time. That could be a pinnacle in the story that might finally lead us to Kevin Russell. Once again, the appeal is Kevin Russell. If for some miraculous reason you're out there and you've heard this podcast, please get in touch. Nobody's going to ridicule you, whether it was real or whether it was hoax. You've kept us busy for 33 years, and we'd love to speak to you. Until the next time, goodbye.